This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.
Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to our webinar today on the SME perspective on European digital policy. Sebastiano Toffaletti is going to speak, I think, on a very interesting manifesto, the Digital SME Manifesto 2030, the European Digital New Deal. My name is Joyce O'Connor and I chair the Digital Group and the Digital Policy Group here at the IIEA. And it's my great pleasure to welcome our distinguished speaker today, Sebastiano Toffaletti, who's the Secretary General of the European Digital SME Alliance. Sebastiano, you're very welcome, and thank you very much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to be with us today, and I appreciate that very much. Sebastiano, thank you, Sebastiano. Who will speak to us for around 25-30 minutes, and then I will go to your audience for question and answers. And Sebastiano and myself would really like to have an interaction, an interactive debate with you, our audience, and we look forward to receiving questions and comments through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And I'll come to those at the end when Sebastiano's presentation is finished. Please join us on X using the handle at IIEA, and to remind you that today's discussion and Q&A are both on the record. We all know that the SMEs are a total part of our economy, of Europe's digital economy, and are essential to ensuring Europe's future prosperity. Sebastiano will discuss this with us today. The Digital SME Manifesto 2030 was launched in March, where he calls for a European Digital New Deal. And that has a resonance about it, doesn't it? And it's an overarching public strategy to put the EU on track for digital leadership by 2030. The European Digital SME Alliance see digital SMEs as the key to success and a key success factor to make Europe part of the digital age. And the manifesto sets out recommendations, as you would expect, on artificial intelligence, cybersecurity and data economy, focusing, I think, interestingly, and we'd be interested to see what you have to say on regulation, enforcement, funding and public-private partnerships, and how to leverage the potential of digital SMEs for a tailor-made regulation. As I said, we're really delighted to have Sebastiano with us. He has headed up the European Digital SME Alliance since 2008. He holds a master's degree in management, economics and industrial engineering from the University of Bologna. He's widely published on topics such as intellectual property rights, standards, e-skills, net neutrality and cloud computing. He is chair of the working group of SMEs at the European Cybersecurity Organisation, ECSO, and is a member of the board of the European Telecommunications Standard Institute and serves on the EU Multi-stakeholder Platform on ICT Standardisation. So, Sebastiano, we really welcome you again and look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Joyce, and thank you to the Institute for having me. I'll quickly try to share my screen and start over with this introduction. Right. This one. All right. Okay, here's the title. So SME Perspectives on European Digital Policy. And as Joyce introduced, I'm gonna discuss the Digital SME 2030 Manifesto, a European Digital New Deal, which was actually published in March earlier this year. To start with, the community my organization represents, the European Digital SME Alliance, is composed of technology companies, small and medium-sized enterprises based in Europe. These companies, including startups, are at the forefront of the development of digital technologies, and they are mostly, but not only, engaged in the B2B sector, meaning they are busy actually transferring technologies to other companies, mainly to other SMEs, and therefore they are really the pacemakers of the digital transformation of the continent. The association actually represents over 30 national or regional associations and clusters in European member states and also neighboring countries. And through this network, we represent around 45,000 companies, and which overall employ around 600,000 people, and they generate around 5 billion euro per year in revenue. You should consider this as a sort of subset of the entire European tech sector or ICT sector. Just as a reference, you should consider the sector in Europe every year produces revenues for around 800 billion euros. So we are talking, around 5 to 6% of the GDP of the continent. And of course, we all understand that this is a driving force of the economic development. Of course, Europe is not the strongest continent or the strongest region around the world in the digital sector. Nevertheless, here as elsewhere, it is a thriving industry. So the manifesto calls for a digital New Deal. You may remember the Green Deal, which was proposed a few years ago, and which made Europe, or is on the path to make Europe a leader in net neutrality, with very ambitious objectives and undisputed, I would say, leadership by the continent in setting the strategy and being the first around the world with these ambitious objectives in terms of net neutrality, of net contributions of CO2 emissions, net zero. Now, we are calling for a similar overarching strategy for digitalization, for digital leadership. Why is that? If you take the data for the digital technologies, the use of digital technologies or the production of digital technologies in Europe, these data are quite serious. If you look at the Commission recently published reports that only 8% of European SMEs are actually using artificial intelligence, and no more than 14% of SMEs in Europe use big data. So this really tells that there is a delay, in the adoption of key technologies. But there is a substantial delay, I would say, in the production per se in Europe of digital products and services. The reports talk about around an 80% of digital products, services, and infrastructure, which is important in Europe from foreign countries, 80%. And even the share of the European exports in the global ICT market are quite dramatic, because if this share was around 21% in 2013, it became half in 2022 to around 11%, again, of the global ICT market value. These data, are just another demonstration of things we are all seeing. There is the fact that Europe is a laggard, and there is a global race towards the development and adoption of new technologies. There is more and more a power game associated with technologies. Not only owning and developing technologies is associated with economic prosperity, but there is an aspect of geopolitical dependencies which are associated to technologies. And in both cases, I would say Europe, we are saying Europe must really understand that this is a primary objective to regain leadership in digital technologies, because the failure to doing so really puts at risk the prosperity of Europe and its, I would say, its geopolitical stature around the world, with all the consequences that we can imagine. Therefore, really, we have proposed this digital New Deal that looks into ways how by 2030 Europe can regain, some confidence and can regain a trust in its leadership in digitalization. Firstly, as many have said, Europe cannot be a continent only of regulations. Regulating technologies is certainly needed in most cases, or has been needed. But Europe must also become a producer of such technologies. Just being a user of technologies developed elsewhere will not, will create more dependencies, and will ultimately, just regulating will not solve the problem. And therefore, we are confident that our industry, especially the digital companies, are ready to, the European companies are ready to provide an alternative, are ready to provide, technologies to Europe, and they really would like to partner with our governments, starting from the European level to the national one, in order to be the partners in this global race for technologies. I have to say, many of our companies, of course, nowadays are quite wary of regulation. Many say, there is regulation makes it difficult to innovate. So we hear a lot of that narrative, and we have to agree with that in most of the cases. However, I also tend to point out that regulation can also be made in a smart way, in a strategic fashion, in order to promote European interest and values also in digital technologies. And if we just give the example of the Digital Markets Act, the DMA, which really is trying to enforce fairness in the use of digital platforms, especially or including by business users such as SMEs that develop independent apps, or that are users of platforms through which they reach the market. So the DMA is a very good example of a targeted legislation that is really trying to address a problem by creating specific constraints only for specific companies. So it's not a one-size-fits-all legislation that will be applicable to every company, but it is only in the scope of the legislation. We only have a handful of dominant platforms, and this is the right approach. Another, I believe, good example of positive legislation that has been developed in the in the current mandate of the European Commission is the Data Act. The Data Act creates for the first time a very important principle, and it is the principle that the user of, when we talk about non-personal data, when we talk about machine-generated data, the user of a device or the owner of a device has the right on the data this device generates. And by having that right means that the owner of the device can get a third party, an independent company, to offer services on the basis of that data. So it really creates a big potential for a market of services based on non-personal data, because we are very often, we have to say this, we are in the situation where devices are manufactured by companies that then lock in the consumers and do not allow anyone else but them to actually exploit the data, with the non-personal data which are provided, developed by those devices. And this is simply unfair, because it is the owner of the device who actually should have the control of his or her own data, whether this is personal or not. And mainly we are talking about non-personal data here. Again, another example, and then I'll move on with the slides, is the same GDPR, the privacy data protection regulation. This has been a very important piece of legislation, because it has created the principle of transnational value of the privacy of European citizens. So the privacy of a European citizen must be respected, whether the data is stored in a European country or in the US or elsewhere. Right, and this is a very important principle, and as a consequence, it has created, and it is creating a lot of business opportunities for companies, and of course, it has given a very fundamental right to European citizens that must be respected everywhere else in the world. So regulation can be used in a smart way. However, we are really calling for the next mandate, the next political cycle, the next commission, to focus on implementing and delivering, okay, not on producing new regulation. I have to be clear on this. Our members are quite, adamant in demanding that, the focus must be delivery, the focus must be implementation, because we have big challenges in front of us, and we expect that really, the next commission follows this advice. But anyway, moving on, the pillars of this digital New Deal are mainly three, and I will structure the rest of the presentation around these three pillars. The first one is mastering digital innovation, and here I'm talking about the way we as Europe master technologies such as artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, big data, and so on. The second pillar is around how we can do business in the single market, the functioning of this single market, how our companies can benefit from it. Are they benefiting from it or not at the moment? You may have seen there is an interesting report by Letta has recently published on this on the single market, which we have taken some inspiration from. And the third point is about forming what we call forming alliances in the ecosystem. This comes from the fact that our industry, the digital sector in Europe, is highly fragmented. This is the reality, because we have many SMEs that are perhaps champions in niche areas, but we don't have the big techs, we don't have the very large global corporations that are champions in technology, and we have to leverage what we have. We can try to, of course, create new champions, large champions, but we have to leverage what we have, our model of the SMEs, and we can do so by federating these ecosystems, by creating alliances, and by allowing companies to work with each other's interwork through interoperability, through standards, through the role of government. I'll discuss that in a few minutes. So these are the three main pillars, and again, I'm structuring the presentation around them. Wait, okay. I'm moving on. So starting with, again, mastering digital innovation, we start with artificial intelligence. Here, of course, we'll understand, how this technology creates, opportunities, but also, challenges to the potential of SMEs. There is, of course, an issue of talent shortage in AI. There is an issue of need for a high computing capacity to be leaders in AI. And there is a market dynamic now whereby there is a strong risk of the winner takes all dynamic, where if it's currently highly concentrated in the hands of a very few companies, and the market could well go into a very oligopolistic or monopolistic type of constellation, so to say. Then we have the AI Act, which has certainly created an important framework for the adoption of this technology in the next years. However, the same AI Act creates serious regulatory issues for SMEs. Just to give you some concrete data here, we have studies by independent consultancies or think tanks that estimate the cost of compliance for an AI provider with the AI Act. And we are talking, think about an SME, we are talking about an initial cost between 100 in the lowest case to 300,000 euros just for the initial compliance, followed by a recurrent annual cost between 50,000 and 100,000 euros every year for continuing the compliance with the AI Act. So indeed, we have the AI Act provides for sandboxes, but I honestly have my doubts that this can be the solution to all the problems. So certainly, the regulatory framework in Europe at the moment is, in my opinion, quite problematic. Continuing with AI, of course, there is a potential for the development of vertical and smaller, let's say, AI foundation models, which are different from the sort of one size takes all solution, fits all solution, like we have currently on the market. Think about ChatGPT and the likes. There is space, we believe, for the development of smaller scale and more vertical, more niche foundation models that can solve more specific problems. And the beauty of these machines is that they require much less computing power, so much less resource intensive than the large language models. They can be developed by SMEs, especially if there is public funding available, if there is a collaboration with the research institutions. And so this is, in our opinion, one of the solutions that can be put forward, especially thinking about the digital sovereignty of Europe. Moving on to data economy, I mentioned that earlier, talking about the Data Act. Here again, the principle of let's say the free movement of especially non-personal data, free movement in the sense that the control by the owner of devices is a fundamental principle. If you think about very common devices or machines like the cars or even the energy meters in the homes, these devices, they constantly generate a lot of non-personal data. The way I drive generates a lot of data, and via this data, a lot of innovative services can be invented. Even the energy used by a house, which is measured by the meter, can be used to generate a lot of innovative services. But however, even if I own my car and I own my house, I don't have the control of the data that my device generates, because the producer, the manufacturer of those devices, either the car manufacturer or the supplier of energy to my home, wants to have the monopolistic control of that data. They want to be the only ones able to do business with that data, whether they do innovation or not. So they close up the market, they leave everyone else outside, and they lock in consumers, they raise prices, and this is absolutely a missed opportunity for our innovative companies. So ideally, this problem is solved with the Data Act. We'll see how this will be implemented. Again, implementation is a fundamental word to be repeated to the next commission. And next to that, we definitely follow very much what the Commission has initiated in the creation of European data marketplaces, where government and private companies can exchange data to create new businesses. So this is a very important project which we are absolutely supporting. Moving on, the third element in this first pillar of master digital innovation is the cyber resilience. Here, of course, I don't need to stress how important now strategic cyber resilience, especially in the age of interconnected digital technologies, is. Especially, seeing that cyber attacks are on the rise, especially not only for citizens, but especially for our businesses. Here I have pasted a couple of graphs that come from our center for sharing and analysis data center for cyber threats, which just highlight how the trend, the plot graph highlights the trend between 2020, the first semester 2021, and the second 2022, and the first semester 2023. And you see how these attacks are on the rise. And the other graph, the pie graph, shows how the percentage of SMEs or smaller enterprises being actually between 11 and 50 employees, the percentage of these companies being the highest attacked entities by these attacks. So one of the important recommendations which we are calling for is the creation of this we call ISACs, so information sharing and analysis centers, addressed especially to SMEs in order to share information and provide common knowledge about the attacks and about the way to prevent such attacks. So this is a fundamental principle, and we are definitely making available the knowledge which is offered by the digital SMEs themselves, many of which are providers of cybersecurity services and products, and by partnering with local and national authorities, they actually strengthen the ecosystems. Right, so we have these capabilities in Europe, in every country, especially when these companies work in collaboration with strong, universities and strong clusters. They are capable of, strengthening entire ecosystems. So these are the elements that we highlight in the area of cyber resilience. Moving on. Yes, the fourth area of master digital innovation is standardization, which I'm going to come back to that later as well, because this is a fundamental area when we want to, be able to create technological ecosystems. As I said earlier, we have a highly fragmented industry in Europe, and we believe that only by, making strategic choices, especially in the use of standards, we can create interoperable frameworks whereby many companies, we don't need the single vertically integrated company. We don't need Apple or the likes to tell us to create a technology, because we can create the same technology if we have several smaller companies working together, each of them providing an element, a component in the larger technology. And we can only do so if we foster, these industry-led standards. And here, we also have been telling the Commission, and we will insist that they have to understand standards are not only useful for regulatory purposes, they are not only useful to set requirements for compliance, but they are useful to create technological ecosystems. And this is something we will always insist, because we have seen, in many cases, the attention to this important aspect has been missing. Continuing, going into the second pillar, which is called doing business for digital SMEs in the digital single market. Here, of course, we are talking about the high fragmentation of the divergence in the national legislations and the difficulties in doing business cross-border for our companies. If you think about the reports are that only, if you take manufacturing SMEs, only 14% of them in Europe actually do business cross-border. And if you take the entire population of SMEs, the share goes probably below 7%. So this means that on one hand, our companies are paying the cost of compliance with an ever-increasing legislations at the European level that create this this ambition of having an internal market. So they have to pay the cost for it, but they don't benefit from it. So they should be, in our opinion, the first and most important clients of the next Commission, because they need to be served. They need to be actually benefiting from this single market. So here we are, drafting some recommendations in terms of supporting them with compliance, the one-stop shops on national level, reducing the regulatory burdens, and so on. We are taking, a couple of recommendations also from the Letta report. He talks about creating a European business code, which we think is a fantastic idea. So this is he says we can do that, creating a sort of 28 regime, next to the 27 national laws. We can create a 28th one, which will mean we have a European. Companies can choose to set up. People can choose to set up their company under the 28th regime, under the European business code, and therefore they benefit from being recognized automatically in all the other member states, and having one single law applicable to them, as opposed to 27 different national situations we have at the moment. Similarly, companies that want to do initial public offerings are, especially SMEs, we often hear that this is too difficult, too complex, too bothersome. So we really, if we want to scale up our companies, if we want to let them have easier access to the capitals, we need to streamline these processes. And at the same time, on the other hand, we call for a tech fund, a tech champion fund to support the companies that are actually on the verge of getting market leadership. So this is a machine that is supposed to ideally generate more European technology champions in the future. the area of intellectual property, here we thought it was important to include it in our manifesto because, especially if you look into the software sector, there is, a strong elephant in the room here, which is the patentability of software. Of course, European law essentially prevents the patentability of software because it says software has to be protected by copyright. Nevertheless, the market is doing quite the opposite, and unfortunately, our patent offices are more and more granting patents on software, with the result that we have a market which is highly concentrated, where a few hundreds of companies around the world, very large companies, own millions and millions, so more than 90% of the software patents in the world. And this is absolutely problematic because this is creating a fundamental barrier to more innovation, more independent innovation in the market. Therefore, really, we call on the next Commission to see this as an important problem to be solved in a way or another. Moving on. The area of skills, which of course is fundamental because there's not going to be, Europe is not going to become, a knowledge-based economy and innovation economy if we do not have the proper investments in upskilling and reskilling. And I think here, I have to say, we often consider Ireland as a best practice, especially we know very well Skillnet Ireland, which is a very good organization, also member here, and they are really at the forefront with a model which is very much based on the collaboration between the public and the private sector, with the provision of skills to the employers, in collaboration with the employers. So, and it is really, I believe, used as something that we present to other countries as a good initiative. So again, we are calling here for incentives for SMEs, especially to invest in reskilling and upskilling. We are calling for a new objective to be set at European level to promote the advanced digital skills development in the 40 million people that are working in the European SME workforce by 2030. So this should be a very ambitious but important objective to be achieved, the advancement, the advanced digital skills for this portion of our workforce. And again, we are calling for alliances between the skilling stakeholders, so universities, training providers, companies, and governments, as it is actually already. There is a beginning of that. We have a digital large-scale partnership taking place, coming from Europe under the Pact of Skills, and this is the beginning of we believe a good opportunity for everyone. Finally, to conclude on doing business for digital SMEs, we talk about the green and digital deal. The two transitions are, we believe, actually the same transition, especially for digital companies. The Green Deal has to be seen as an opportunity because, of course, digital technologies where they produce, of course, negative CO2 emissions, so they actually emit themselves, they also cut emissions. And we believe the balance has to be positive, and only by utilizing digital technologies in the positive way, we can foster sustainability, because the net impact has to be positive and is positive on these technologies. Therefore, it is fundamental to be able to calculate in a science-based way the net impact of technologies, and there are several attempts to do that. One of them is called the European Green Digital Coalition, which has already produced, a set of methodologies, science-based methodologies to calculate the net impact of, technology solutions on specific use cases. We believe again that an investment plan should be in place to support those companies, especially the SMEs, that develop net positive digital solutions. Moving on to the third and last area of the presentation and the manifesto, which is what we call the Alliance for Digital Leadership, and here is all around the role of government, and we start with the role of public-private partnerships, because again, as I said earlier, given the high fragmentation of the digital ecosystem, we believe government has a role to play in being the federator or the catalyzer of this ecosystem. So only by doing so, we will be able to, move the market in certain strategic directions. So investments by government, strategic choices of specific interoperability standards, if they are fostered by government, then companies will follow, will use the same standards, and they will develop ecosystems based on those standards. So we really think government has to understand that the market cannot be left on its own, especially not when we have other continents, let's take the US or China, which have two perhaps very different models. One is more government-driven, one is more market-driven, but these are two extremes that can move very fast and in very specific directions, whereas we tend not to have the same drive, because again, we don't have strong leaders in our market, neither government nor big corporations. So we need our government to work in partnership with the private sector, so to move on, in innovation and in specific sectors. Again, similarly, public procurement. So understanding that when procuring technologies, think about things like smart cities. When the public administration procures solutions for a smart city, it can, of course, only focus on serving its own citizens, but it should also think about the secondary effects of procurement, which is to foster, the creation of a local ecosystem, of technology actors that can themselves become drivers for the local development, because they can attract employment, they can train people, they can, of course, create jobs and opportunities, and therefore, public procurement, which is, almost 10% of the GDP nowadays in Europe is due to public procurement, a bit less than that, but it is still a very fundamental driver of our economy, and therefore, thinking about the role of public procurement to promote the development of the indigenous European industry is absolutely important, and that's why we also call for the introduction of a Buy European Tech Act, which doesn't want to be, a protectionist measure. Of course, we don't want to infringe any WTO rule with such a proposal. There are obviously ways to do a Buy European Tech Act, which will not infringe any international law. You can do so by thinking about requirements in public procurement which are in line with our values and interests. You can think about things like local sourcing. You think about data localization requirements, sustainability, corporate social responsibility, and so on and so forth. There are clever ways to give a preferential treatment to European local companies in the delivery of technology products and services, and we really call on the next Commission to do so. I think this is going to be probably the last point, and it is a point we call international partnerships. Here again, in living in a globalized world, we believe a strong support by government at the European and international level should be given to those SMEs who have an ambition to work at international level, especially who want to form alliances with like-minded companies in other regions of the world, who want to do trade in those regions, who want to work, for instance, on international standards together, because this is a market-driven initiative, and they can do so only if our governments understand that this is a strategic stakeholder, and they should be supported in their international efforts. I think overall, let me conclude. These digital SMEs are at the forefront of technological developments, and they can advance. They advance innovation and competitiveness. This European Digital New Deal is a framework to empower the SMEs to accelerate digital transformation. The collaboration between policymakers, industry stakeholders, digital SMEs in particular, is paramount for creating an environment conducive to innovation and growth in Europe. And by embracing digital innovation and fostering supportive ecosystem, Europe can position itself as a global leader in technology by 2030. I think with this I conclude, and here I have just a few contact details, and I'm happy to stay in contact with anyone who won't be able to ask questions today.
This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.